Welcome to the ChangeMakers Way, 10 principles to create change with ease and efficiency. So you've come to the right place if you've read carefully the invitation. You've come to the right place if you consider yourself a thought leader, an advocate, someone who is creating or already leading change, or even someone who's aspiring to create change, or simply be the change, starting the change from the inside out as we create transformation for ourselves and eventually for those around us, our work, and our community. So as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who are already here, to make the most of our session, just make sure, close out any other applications, and I'm going to mute you throughout this presentation. If you have any questions, just key them in the chat box. I'll do my best to answer all questions at the end of the session, and if not, I'll be emailing you. Just make sure you reach out to me as well. And also the other thing is, I'll be inviting you to do some level of interaction during the presentation. Even though you're muted, you're still going to be interacting. So allow me to introduce myself. First and foremost, I would consider myself a curious explorer. I'm from the Philippines and I lived in 4 countries. From Philippines, I moved to Singapore, lived and worked in Singapore, and then I migrated to Australia, stayed in Melbourne, Australia, after which I moved to the US just when Trump got elected to office back in 2016. And recently I've journeyed back to Sydney, Australia, just a couple months ago, so just settling in. And I've also traveled so far to 54 countries, and in some ways I'm glad I did that, because right now in COVID-19 there's so much restrictions around travel. I also consider myself a lifelong learner. You know, my intense curiosity has led me to explore different ways of creating change and transformation. I've looked for best practices, world-class frameworks, benchmarks, and learned from thought leaders all over the world. Sometimes I would follow someone who I consider a role model and a thought leader I even want to model myself and actually directly learn from them and attend their courses or programs. I've done that from here in Australia to the UK, USA, all over the place really. And over the last 15 years, even 15 to 20 years of my career, I've been a change leader within an organization, but also consultant, trainer, and coach across dozens of organizations, having worked with Big 4 consulting firms, KPMG and Ernst & Young, alongside thousands of executives, leaders, managers, and stakeholders that I've been fortunate enough to be my clients. So I've also worked in diverse projects, from creating cultures of innovation, leading business excellence, to helping communities adopt new technology, and even assisting migrants in sustainable development programs. So I've worked from the corporate, small business, NGOs, nonprofits, and government. But years ago, I was a bit disillusioned and I left the corporate. Years ago, I thought, I'm not going to do organizational change anymore. I don't want anything to do with it. And I thought change management in itself is actually getting in the way of change. With all the methodologies at our disposal, why is it that 70% of change initiatives still fail? And for those of you who are in the profession of change, you're probably familiar with this statistic, and it was first coded and studied as early as the 1990s. But for some of you, you may be new to this statistic, and to this day, research still shows that 7 out of 10 change initiatives fail. So why are we failing at change? So the inconvenient truth is that after so many years of applying our craft, us as change professionals, transformation professionals, there's no hard evidence that we've made a dent in this appalling prognosis for executing change, there's still a high failure rate. And I can attest to that from my personal observation and experience as clients bring me in when they're already struggling with change. So I have been delivering, I call successful change outcomes from the point of view of my clients. But why is the system still broken? Because even in the best of times, I have seen so much struggle, so much toxicity, dysfunctionality that brings the worst in organizations and dis-ease in people. Now that, while that sounds a bit jaded, I think I would challenge you to look around you if there's some veracity to that. And now in the worst of times, I can't even begin to articulate what a lot of people are going through. So I believe, here's what I believe. I believe it's time to change the way we do change. And this word had never been so mentioned so often than right now, with what we're going through, with extreme volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity brought about by COVID-19. I also believe that to truly create positive, lasting change, it needs to go hand in hand with fostering well-being. And I believe that instead of just focusing on methodologies and processes, I believed in principled change making. So after working with thousands of senior executives, leaders, managers, thought leaders, and various stakeholders, and after I've been in a 14-day strict quarantine, after coming back here to Sydney, the ChangeMakers Way 10 Principles was born. How it happened was I sat one day and it's almost as if pearls of wisdom, the collective lessons learned, not just for myself, but from people I've worked with, has come to the forefront. And I was inspired with a stream of consciousness to come up with the 10 principles. But first, what do we mean by principle? It's important that we mean the same thing here. It's a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief. And that system of belief, for example, is our belief, our paradigms around how do we lead, create, make, manage change. System of belief or behavior for a chain of reasoning. More importantly, principles, whether we're conscious of it or not, guide our actions. So what we'll cover today is we'll cover the 10 principles of ChangeMakers Way that will help you become an active agent of change if you're not already, with effortless ease, effectiveness, and efficiency, so you can help others do the same as well. I will be inviting you throughout my presentation to begin embodying the principles and create positive shifts with a sense of clarity, calm, and confidence. Look, when you try a new suit or new clothes, right? You just try them on and see if it fits. And it's exactly what I want you to do here today. Try on the principles that I'm going to share with you tonight and see, how does that sense like? What does it bring up for you? And sense it. And if it doesn't fit, you can always remove it. So we will begin to discover ways to navigate the shifts that you're going through by first becoming aware of where your pains are and how you could transmute those into paths for change to build a positive impact. We will learn to apply each principle with my recommended points for progress, so as to start helping you release some of the pressure you're under and hold the fort for your family, job, and community. Now, you don't have to believe everything I say. You know, what you can do is really take it on and test what I'm sharing with you today and see if it works. You'll also hear of stories of struggle, survival, and thriving in extremely challenging times, probably more extreme than where we are at today. Hard to believe, it might be hard to believe, especially for those of us who haven't been old enough, and this COVID-19 is the worst of times for a lot of us. Let me start with the story of 3 men and a woman. Peter is a Russian engineer living during World War II. And he was deployed and asked by the Russian army to serve as a pilot during the war. Now, without much training, of course, Peter, in one of his missions, flying over German territory, his plane got shot down. Eugenio, who is a Filipino, also lived during World War II. And unfortunately for Eugenio, he was captured by the Japanese during the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. And alongside many American soldiers who fought together with the Filipinos, he was forced to do the death march, the infamous death march of Bataan, where thousands and thousands of soldiers, Filipino-American soldiers, perished and died. And the third man, apologies, Jose, is also a Filipino, but unlike Eugenio or Peter, Jose was not as educated. He had a high school, and he finished high school and then served as a humble security guard in one of the small villages in the northern parts of the Philippines called Isabela. And when the Japanese occupied his community, he heard rumors of all the atrocities of the Japanese in the other villages. And I'll continue with my stories as I go through the principles and see what happens to this cast of characters. So first of all, principle number 1, principle of movement. Today, I move myself and others one step closer to a brighter future. This is where I would ask you to start interacting. But since I've muted all of you, nobody can really hear you. What I would like you to do is to verbalize this yourself. And you may even close your eyes and sense what it does for you. So today, I move myself and others one step closer to a brighter future. So say it. What that really does is, first of all, the premise is that we have a view of the brighter future. And if we don't, what would help us is to transport ourselves to that future and see what you see, feel what you feel, hear what you hear. What is it that you want to have happen? And once you've transported yourself into that future, articulate what you're sensing, articulate everything in a sensory-based terms as you can. That way, you move yourself and become moving to the people who you are inviting or enrolling to that change. The other part of this principle is that you move yourself and others one step closer to a brighter future. And that one step could be just baby steps. The important thing is consistency. Keep taking that step, start and begin. You know, small baby steps, as long as you keep going. And the pain of not moving is frustration, because we feel stuck if we don't keep moving. We just have to keep going. And the path for change is fulfillment. No matter how small the steps are, as long as we get past the barriers and we break through, that creates a sense of fulfillment, not just for us, but for the people we are trying to serve. And here are some points for progress that I would recommend. What is my vision for a brighter future? And as I said, make it as sensory based as you can. Transport yourself into the future. And what is my outcome? Now, there's a difference between vision and outcome. Outcome are more tangible. You chunk down your vision and bring them to life with very specific tangible outcomes. And there are techniques into how you can develop well-formed outcomes. And ask yourself, what one small step can I do today? What is that one small step that you can do today to start to get yourself going and others moving along with you? Now, the second principle is principle of ecology. I make decisions with the greater good in mind. So say it after me. I make decisions with the greater good in mind, and embody that. See what it brings up for you. There's a reason why I ask you to verbalize, because just listening to what I'm saying creates a different effect as when you're actually verbalizing it, and see what it brings up for you. So that's quite self-explanatory. What is the pain of not making decisions with a greater good in mind? That means, looking at all the possible consequences of our decision, short-term and long-term, and looking at all the other players that our decision is impacting. The cause of fragmentation is a lack of ecology. Now we may wonder, what do we mean by fragmentation? Do you ever experience in organizations political silos, like all this infighting with the different divisions or different units or even teams, and turf protection? That's fragmentation. And even if you look at politics, what should be bipartisan, and say different parties couldn't agree on a policy or even an approach. We've seen that, an approach, a holistic collaborative approach for the pandemic. A fragmented approach has proven to be disastrous for some countries, as we've already seen. So the path is integration. And when we're more integrated, we're able to create a more positive impact simply by making decisions with a greater good in mind and transcending our own self-interests or even political interests. So what is the shared, you ask yourself, here are some points for progress. What is the shared intention for my tribe? And I use tribe here metaphorically. Your tribe could be your family, your clan, it could be your community, or it could even be your teams at work. And ask yourself for the people that you want to create a positive transformation for. What is the shared intention? And what does greater good mean for you? Not just for you, what is the criteria? What are the criteria for the greater good with the tribe that you want to serve as a change maker? And again, there are ways and techniques to facilitate this, but this is a starting point to start thinking about this as points for progress, to go beyond fragmentation towards integration. So I go back to the story of Jose. As I said, Jose heard rumors of the atrocities that the Japanese had done to the other villages that they have occupied. I know some of you listening right now are Filipinos yourselves, and there's been stories, and Jose heard of rumors of comfort women being abducted, kidnapped, and put into cubicles and raped. Not only that, he's heard horrors of senseless killings and execution. Jose did something that is unconventional. Jose thought, there is no way that the community can fight the Japanese. So he thought, with the community in mind, that he'll take the risk to actually establish rapport with the Japanese. He thought maybe by being in rapport with the Japanese, he would be able to then mitigate the aggression and violence. He took the risk of being called a traitor. And in the end, amazingly enough, what he did actually worked. He is quite gifted with dealing with people, with establishing rapport, even with the enemies. And that gift comes from his sense of compassion and empathy. So Jose actually was able to save lives in his community because the Japanese, for some reason, they felt comfortable and they didn't, for some reason, feel the need to engage in the atrocities that they've done in the other villages. The third principle of the ChangeMakers way is the principle of mastery. I strive for mastery to create with effortless ease. Now, I invite you to articulate that. Nobody can hear you. I've muted you, so go ahead. Embody that, wear it. I strive for mastery to create with effortless ease. What do we mean by that, effortless ease? You know, when we were kids, pre-verbal, we struggled communicating. I don't know if you remember, but there was a point in our lives that we struggled communicating with adults because we have not had the mastery of our language. And that has caused us a lot of pain, of course. And not only that, even as adults, sometimes we still have problems in our communication, miscommunication still happen. It's really about not having or lack of mastery in the way we communicate, negotiate, persuade, influence, and so on and so forth. But we're not talking just about mastery of these general skills. We're also talking about mastery of our own craft and the profession that we're in. Now, mastery is not just about, you know, trying to be number one or all those self-serving, egoistic goals of, I want to be the best. I want to be the top, right? Mastery really goes beyond the pain of friction and struggle because you're fluent with what you are doing. You have, by having reached mastery, the path that it creates for you is flow and ease. And that's the intrinsic reward of committing yourself to mastery. And by doing so, you're also able to model that and also to create the kind of condition with the people that you serve. So what are the points for progress? Very simple. First of all, the starting point is, what it is that do I naturally enjoy learning and developing? And what am I committed to learning and developing to be my best? And I know some of you here, I really admire some of you who are attending this because I know you are at the top of your game and you're really great at what you do. When I am being at my best doing what I love, that is like what? So these are the questions that we can start reflecting on. And the fourth principle is the principle of congruence. I make congruent choices that align my intentions, behaviors, and outcomes. Now, congruence sounds like integrity, but they're a bit different. Integrity is really about making your decisions and actions in line with your values. It sounds similar, but congruence has a physiological imprint. You sense it. For example, if somebody asks you for a favor, and you don't really feel comfortable saying yes, and just so you are seen or perceived to be a nice person, you actually say yes. Do you sense that, you know, not feeling right in your stomach, or not, you know, you can hardly breathe, or whatever is the sensation? There is a physical sense you get if you're not being congruent. At the same time, when you are congruent in something, have you felt that, like, when you're saying something and you really mean it, there's a sense of conviction, and you can even probably feel yourself, your posture straightening up and your breathing expanding and you feel expansive. So this is a very, it varies from person to person, but test it, check it out. Those times when you're not being congruent, or you're being incongruent, and those times that you are truly congruent, sense what is the physicality that brings up for you. The pain of incongruence is conflict. So if you're not congruent with your decisions, if you're not congruent with your behaviors, intentions, it creates internal conflict. And not only internal conflict, it actually creates conflict with others and with the community and with our teams and groups. So as a collective unit, if there's a lack of congruence with the collective, with what they truly intend, with their intention versus their behaviors, that creates a lot of conflict. I mean, we've seen organizations who say this is their policy, this is what they believe in, this is what they value, but people actually see that's not the case in terms of the decisions made, in terms of the behaviors made, and that's where it creates conflict. And not only conflict, that also causes stress. So the path to change and the gift of change for congruence is peace. When you're congruent with yourself, there's a sense of peace, there's a sense of alignment internally, and also with people you work with. So here are some nuggets or points for progress. Very simple question. What is my intention for what I am creating right now? So congruence requires self-awareness and mindfulness moment by moment in terms of what is your intention with what you're trying to create, and for what you have already created, what would have been your intention? Why are you where you are right now? Whether you're happy or frustrated or fulfilled with what you've created, where you are right now, ask yourself, what would have been your intention for where you are right now? For example, a lot of us commit to, for as simple as, okay, I'm gonna wake up early in the morning, 5:30, 6 o'clock, so I will do my exercise or I go running. And then guess what happens? Alarm rings and we put it on snooze, and it keeps snoozing. Before we know it, it's 7 a.m. and we have to rush for work. What must have been the intention there? And do we really have congruence in saying, okay, I'm gonna commit to doing exercise? So there's a lot of things that's going on there at an unconscious level. And once we figure that out, it actually creates an internal sense of peace, and we'll move things faster in terms of creating transformation for ourselves and for others. Principle number 5 is a principle of attention. I own my attention. Now you can say that. Once again, I invite you to embody that, and you may close your eyes and see what that brings up for you. I own my attention. This is probably the easiest to remember principle, and probably could be easily underestimated as being easy, but it's not. It's actually the most profound and probably the most challenging of all the principles. Because think about it. Do you really own your attention? Think about it. Where is your attention right now? And I'll go through the points for progress. The pain of not owning your attention is distraction, which leads to confusion. You're all over the place and you feel you can't focus. And the path to it is clarity and personal power. It's really powerful, and it brings you real personal power when you truly embody what I own my attention means. So think about it. What am I paying attention to right now? I know that you guys are looking at me, listening to me, but I don't know for those whose videos are off if you're paying attention somewhere else. I can only assume you're paying attention to me right now. But even if you're listening to me and watching me, is your mind totally present? And also, how is my attention being influenced by others? How am I directing other people's attention? So we are always influencing, whether we like it or not, whether we are conscious of it or not. Others are always influencing us. We're always influencing other people. And when it comes to attention, our experience of reality is very much a product of our attention. Other people can filter our attention. That's filtering reality. Other people can frame our attention. That's directing our experience of reality. But we ourselves have the power to do the same thing. We can direct other people's attention. We can frame other people's attention. We can shift other people's attention. Attention in space, attention in the past, attention in the present, attention in the future. And even just paying attention to different time frames that already affects our internal state. You know, when you talk about, for example, regret, you don't regret when your attention is in the moment, because regret is the kind of state that pays attention to the past. Or for example, fear, you can't be in a state of fear if your attention is in the present. You only experience state of fear if your attention is in the future. The same with anxiety. You only experience state of anxiety if your attention is in the future. And you can't experience real happiness and joy if you're not able to be present with your attention in the moment. So attention is a very powerful thing. And there's so much to learn about how do we own our attention. So back to our story. I haven't yet introduced to you the one woman in our story, Frida. Frida also lived in Germany and during World War II. And Frida fell in love. She's in her 20s, she fell in love. Nothing special about that. What's unique about Frida's situation is she fell in love with a Russian engineer who turned into a pilot and whose plane got shut down in German territory. Frida fell in love with a fugitive. Now, to cut the long story short, Frida and Peter got together and they ended up expecting a child. What Peter was hoping for is he would be getting a German passport. Turned out the Germans disowned Frida and actually took away her German passport. Now, to make matters worse, they decided, okay, they would have to leave Europe and either, in a place where they accept both Germans and Russians, right? And they'll take the first ship that's bound to countries that accept Russians and Germans. And they had two options, Venezuela and Australia. So the first ship that left that they were able to catch was the one bound for China, which then passed through Australia. So Frida found herself with a kid at that time and another one on the way in a refugee settlement somewhere in the border of New South Wales and Victoria here in Australia. Now, think about this. She's in her 20s. She doesn't speak English, and she also doesn't speak Russian. And she's surrounded by refugees who are mostly, if not all of them, were Eastern Europeans. Now, those Eastern Europeans shared two things in common. One, they spoke Slavic languages and Russian languages where they have a way of understanding each other. And two, they have a shared hatred for the Germans. So that was if we think what we have right now is tough, think about Frida. But Frida decided to learn English and she eventually became very fluent in English. She also secretly learned Russian. So the people backstabbing her, not really literally in her back, but even in front of her face, she was finally able to understand what they're talking about. And with her fluency in English, she was able to get a job in a shoe factory and saved enough money so she can go back and study, eventually became a psychiatric nurse, saved more money, and she and Peter eventually started a deli business in Melbourne, and they started thriving. And with their successful business, they were able to buy their dream home with a view of the River Hume. That was their dream home. And also they've raised 4 kids who all had their college education. Now, moving on, principle number 6, excellence. I aim for excellence in execution, not just results. Now, I would like to invite you to articulate that and verbalize that and internalize it. I aim for excellence in execution, not just results. Have you ever heard the saying, the means justify the ends? Well, some people can be quite Machiavellian in that the ends justify the means for them. But we know too well that that's not sustainable. And plus, the pain that causes is a sense of shame and regret, unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath. And the path to excellence and change is satisfaction and pride. Think about it. When you do your best every step of the way, regardless of whether your best changes from moment to moment, and you execute with excellence in mind, you would inevitably have a sense of satisfaction and pride in what you do. Plus, also, the added bonus of excellence, focusing on excellence in execution, not just results, is you can systematize it and make your results eventually be replicable. So what are some points for progress that we can think about? First of all, think about, what is my relationship with excellence? You know, is it important for you? What are my standards for excellence? And how am I creating higher standards of excellence? I took this photo in Italy, in Sicily, to be specific. Principle number 7, evidence and intuitive intelligence. I back myself with evidence and intuitive intelligence. Now, some of you here who are lawyers in my audience probably appreciate this very much. But it's not only lawyers who need to have evidence. All of us need to back ourselves with evidence when we make assertions of what we think is truth. It's true to us and true for other people. Why is that important? Because we make a lot of decisions, whether based on evidence or not. And we also sometimes just have to trust our intuition, given the lack of evidence. And there's no such thing as 100% perfect information or perfect data. At some point, we do have to learn to balance tangible evidence as well as intuitive intelligence. And one thing I learned, one of the things, the discipline that was ingrained in us in consulting, right, is that one of the partners, senior partners I used to work with, he said, always back yourself up. So when we deal with clients, even though we start with an intuition, with a hypothesis of what the client is after, we still test that hypothesis. And we have the wherewithal to then throw out that hypothesis if it proves to be, you know, null and void type of hypothesis. So by not backing ourselves up with evidence and by not trusting our intuition when we should, it just puts us in a position of self-doubt. It makes us waver. And the path to transmute that is confidence. People are attracted to confidence. And if we are to be change makers, we do need confidence. And by applying evidence and by trusting our intuition when we have to, that actually creates confidence for us. So the question here is, what is my relationship with my intuition or unconscious mind? Have I defined what kind of evidence is acceptable for my outcomes? One of the things that cause depression or self-flagellation for people is that they haven't defined what is an acceptable evidence for their outcome. So when they actually finally achieve their outcome, they don't even know that they have, and don't have that congratulation or celebration. There's no sense of affirmation. So it's important to establish what is my acceptable outcome, or what is the acceptable evidence for my outcome. And if some of you, I don't know, maybe some of you have read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talked about system 1, system 2 thinking. And both are equally important. There are situations when you just have to go with your gut and you go with rules of thumb. If you have been, say, a police officer or you've been dealing with or an investigation, what do you call that? Private detective, you would have a sense of, you know, what criminal is like, but at the same time, we do need to balance that with evidence as well, because profiling people based on stereotypes can be quite dangerous. So it's important to then balance system 1 and system 2 thinking to create or lead change with confidence. Principle number 8. This is just as profound as the principle number 5 of attention. Principle number 8 is about energy. I am intentional about my energy and how it impacts others. I want you to wear that and embody that by saying it and see what that brings up for you. Say it. I am intentional about my energy and how it impacts others. I know energy is something that is not so tangible, and it's kind of hard to explain what we mean by that. But again, like congruence, it has a physiological imprint. We have a sense when our energy is low. We have a sense when our energy is depleted. We have a sense when our energy is high, right? And also with the people we're with, we have a sense of a positive vibe or the energy of the group that we're with. And as leaders, we need to be intentional with our energy. We have to have the awareness and mindfulness. Like, can we energize a group? Can we energize a collective? Because the pain of not being intentional with your energy and being mindless about our energy is isolation. Because we never know if we're actually depleting other people's energy. And sometimes on an unconscious level, that's the reason why people would be avoiding us, right? And that causes isolation. Unless, of course, they're just naturally a very energetic and with a positive energy type of person. And the path to being intentional about our energy is a sense of connection. We're able to bridge isolation to connection. So, question is, do I have a sense of my energy and others' energy? And when I have a positive energy, that's like what? So reflect on that. Go back to the time when you have really positive energy, if you don't have that positive energy right now, but think about it. Like, that's like what? And sense it. Sense what you see, hear, and feel when you have that good energy. And then, do I energize others or do I deplete them? If you're not sure, get feedback. Get feedback from people you trust who would give you an honest answer. And again, there are a lot of exercises that will help you have a better sense of your energy and even increase or enhance your energy. So back to Jose. Jose finally passed away when he was in his 70s. And the interesting thing was that when he passed away, there was such a long procession in his funeral, for his funeral. As it turned out, even though Jose and his wife Maria only had 2 kids, they've raised dozens. Their home is like an open house. They're always open for the downtrodden, the homeless, people seeking respite, even for just a day, and some for years. It seems as though they always have the resources to help other people. And because of that, everybody in the community not only knew them, but loved them. And not just within the community, but in other villages as well. So nowhere, Jose and Maria, their wealth is nowhere near the wealth of Peter or Frida or even Eugenio. But they were able to, for some reason, help anyone who sought their help and support. Now, Jose and Maria, they've been married for decades. And just like any 2 people who'd been in love and been together day in and day out, when Jose left, it's as though the life energy was sucked away from Maria. And it didn't take long. After 2 years, she too left this world. And like Jose, there was a long procession for her funeral. Principle number 9, elegance. This is a photo I took in Salonite, Sicily. It was actually a Greek architecture. I operate with coherence and a strong bias for simplicity, efficiency, and effectiveness. Now I invite you to wear that, embody it, and say it. I operate with coherence and a strong bias for simplicity, efficiency, and effectiveness. And in case you're wondering why I chose this picture, because back in those days, they used the golden ratio for their architecture. And as you can see, you know, it's not a complete building, but it stands the test of time. It's still there after so many centuries. So the pain of lack of elegance is complexity or complications. And the path is completion in a way that is swift, effective, and efficient. So you would have seen designs that are elegant, designs that are seamless. I don't know if some of you in our audience here are already leading change or have seen a lot of change initiatives. I have been brought to clean up messy change initiatives, messy ones where they've been overcomplicated. They have blueprints, roadmaps here and there that don't really integrate. And so that really causes a lot of headache, hemorrhaging of finances, and even turnover of frustrated resources. So how can you create an approach which we call in the consulting world mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive? I think the best way for me to explain what mutually exclusive is, if you imagine a spaghetti, like if you have concepts, they are not over, your concepts and ideas are not overlapping like spaghetti. They are tidy and neat and cleanly and clearly defined. At the same time, your ideas are comprehensively exhaustive. That means your design already takes into account every possible requirement, need, or even scenario. Now, this is actually a skill that we're taught in consulting, and it's the secret to what world-class consultants do. So what can you let go of that will still create the same, if not better outcome? Now the ChangeMakers principle number 10, curiosity. And this is probably my favorite, and this is a photo of me paragliding over the Sea of Marmaris in Turkey. This is years ago. So I am curious and open about what is different, unknown, and uncertain. Again, I invite you to try that on, verbalize it, articulate it, and see what that brings up with you, and close your eyes if you have to. I am curious and open about what is different, unknown, and uncertain. The thing is, when we talk about innovation, there's no innovation without curiosity. There's no change without curiosity. Curiosity is the seed of new realities. And also, you know, when it comes to what is different, what is our attitude when it comes to what is unknown and uncertain? This COVID-19 has brought up a lot of that. Hey, this is a different world now. Hey, there's so much that is uncertain. Hey, you know, there's still a lot of things that we don't know. We don't even know what we don't know. What is our response to that? And as change makers or change leaders, what kind of responses do we want to model? The pain of lack of curiosity is fear and anxiety. You know, curiosity is actually the antidote to fear. You know, when you think about the future, what is your attitude to that as well? And when you bridge that, the path for change and what it gives you is awakening and aliveness. And I'll add another A to that, awe, basically awe. You know, I love to travel, and independent travel brings that sensory heightened awareness, and it makes you feel a lot more alive and almost having a new leash in life. And that's driven by curiosity to explore what is different, what is new. And that's one of the reasons why I travel to new places, even places where they don't speak English or they don't speak my language. Totally keeps me totally present in the moment and sharpens my calibration of the situation, sharpens my sensory awareness. So what is my immediate reaction to what is different, unknown, or uncertain? What happens if I simply ask what if or why not, right? And when was the last time I was genuinely curious? And that's like what? We're all capable of this curiosity because as kids, we were intensely curious. So I know we all have it in us to have that kind of curiosity that overcomes our fear and anxiety and brings awakening and aliveness for us in our lives and the people we serve. So back to our story. Hehenyo survived the death march. You know what he did? He was here as he heard the bayonets, as he heard people struggling, right? He heard screaming behind him during the death march. He knew that every time you stumble, the Japanese would pierce people. They would pierce them with their bayonet, and that's how people die. They get pierced by the bayonet. Plus, part of the death march is that why it's called this death march. They're not given food. They're not while they're asked to do laborious things, they're not really given sustenance, even drinks. So what Hehenyo did, every chance he got, he stashed guava leaves, held on to plants, and chewed on them when the Japanese were not looking. So Hehenyo is a sturdy one. Hehenyo lived to a ripe old age of 99. He was actually pretty healthy. He took good care of his health. He exercised daily. And although he did some, what do you call that? Not so good decisions in life. When he was widowed, he remarried, had 5 children with the second wife, and then left the wife and had mistresses. And finally, with the last mistress, had more children. So being the healthy man that he is, on his 99th year, one day he was walking, and he walks with the gait of a young man, good posture and everything. And he was walking, and finally he had a stroke. And he had his last gasp and fell flat on his face just like that. His life was over. Now, his heirs found out because Hehenyo was considered a war veteran. He'd been actually receiving pension from the USA as a war veteran, so he's provided well for his family. And also, his children found out that he'd already taken care, even of his funeral. All the expenses, everything had been taken care of. Now, Peter has been quite the survivor, isn't he? Like, okay, his plane got shot over German territory, managed to escape, and still survive. But not only that, Peter actually survived 5 strokes. And on top of that, Peter also survived 3 suicide attempts. And on his last attempt, Peter locked himself up inside the car, had a tube attached to the exhaust pipe, and he passed out. Now, Frida found passed out Peter right on time and managed to revive him with the ambulance. So, you know, you won't have thought with Frida, if you met Frida, you won't have thought she's married to a depressive alcoholic. Frida just is a very joyful spirit and brings light to a room, to a party, as they say. And, you know, when Peter was in the nursing home, Frida, who loves to bake, would bake cakes and give it to the nurses to make sure that they take good care of Peter and don't neglect him, because, you know, things could happen in nursing homes. Now, Peter in his final days had dementia, and Frida, however, was surrounded by people who loved her. And I remember even during her birthdays, right, she would have a flood of calls and birthday cards. So Frida is well loved. Frida is still alive, and his son takes good care of her full time. But the last time I met Frida, she said something to me that surprised me. She said, "Rona, do you know that I never really knew for a long time if Peter really loved me? Oh, I loved him dearly. But one day he left for New York looking for a woman. He never found her. So he came back to me. I loved him nevertheless. Nothing's changed. And one day in the nursing home, Peter started calling me, Frida, Frida. And I rushed to him, held his hand, said, I'm here, Peter. And as I said, remember Peter had dementia at the time. And Frida said, Peter looked me straight in the eye and said, Frida, my Frida, I love you. And Frida told me, Peter passed away after that. And that was everything for me. So we've heard the 10 principles, ChangeMakers 10 principles, and I've woven through stories of 3 men and a woman. And we've heard their struggles. Some of them survive, some of them thrive. For us, it's time to end the struggle and shift from merely surviving to thriving in these extremely challenging times. Well, while some of us may already be thriving, what about the people around us? What about the communities we serve? How about the people we worked with? We have a role to play as change makers. And I believe it's time to change the way we do change. It's time to truly create positive, lasting change that fosters well-being. And it's time for principled change making. I know some of you don't do organizational change like I do, but I know, as I've said, you've come here because you are servant leaders, innovators, advocates, thought leaders, or people who simply are fed up with the status quo and want to create change. I know you came here as someone who also wants to be the change from the inside out with the greater good in mind. You want to create a positive difference and implement new ways of working while fostering well-being. You're tired of the status quo and want to overcome the overwhelm that comes with creating change. And if that's not your experience, you at least want to go beyond the struggle to survive and start thriving, not just for you, but to help others do the same. So I am here to share everything I learned that would help you be a successful change maker, starting where you are, at work, in your community. So the change maker's way, you see, it's not enough to know the principles. We should be able to translate principles into practices. I barely scratched the surface here with those recommended points for progress. If you are already in the process of creating change or desiring change and leading it, you would want to have a roadmap, applying the principles to create the change you want to have happen, and with ease, efficiency, and effectiveness. You want to integrate the principles with strategies, tactics, and tools to lead change with calm, clarity, and confidence. And for some of you who are already well-versed and equipped with organizational change or even social change, you already have some of those in your playbook, in your toolkit. And then embody the principles with honest self-awareness and personal accountability to overcome both your internal, it's more important, internal as well as external roadblocks to achieve successful outcomes. Because the internal roadblocks are all here and here. The reality is many of you would eventually need to step up as leaders if you're not already leaders. I know some of you are already leaders. Grow your influence, develop your personal power, and mobilize support, collaboration, and adoption to create the change you want to have happen with lasting impact while fostering well-being and a shared sense of satisfaction. Isn't that more fulfilling when it's a shared sense of achievement and satisfaction? So here's what I know. I know you won't be here if you are already comfortable completely in creating change and where you are, without stress, without the toxicity, the drama, the pressure, and all the hidden roadblocks and blind spots that continue to get in your way. I also know you would want help if you are wanting to lead change in mapping your vision with crystal clear outcomes in a way that brings people together on the same page with you with a shared sense of ownership. And this doesn't have to be with a large community, big bang change, or your workplace. It could even be with your family. You would want to find out secrets to persuasion to get what you need now from key decision makers so you can make the change you want to have happen at work or your community. And this is not just for organizational change and even those who are in sales, because you're actually selling ideas and you are promoting new ways of working, new technology, new practices, new behaviors. And you would want to develop your influence with a network map. When I say network, that's your stakeholder network map. And an engagement strategy so you can elegantly navigate politics instead of being roadkill to politics to make a difference faster and better. And this is actually what I've helped a lot of the leaders and senior executives I work with. How do you navigate? I even have a tool which I call a political heat map. And you would want to learn effortless ways to shift mindset and behaviors so you can have the collaboration and the adoption you need without the drama. And I promise that's possible. You would want to find out tried and tested patterns of excellence so you can apply to simplify, that you can apply to simplify the complex so you are more efficient, at ease, and at your best, and again, to help others be the same. And I know that if all this resonates with you, that you would value personalized guidance, feedback, and support in embodying the principles and applying practices of highly effective change maker in the company of like minds and like hearts. So here's my dream. I'd like to share you my dream. I dream of leaders healing organizations and communities as change makers with the greater good in mind and bringing out the best collectively and making people thrive. Again, it's leaders healing organizations and communities as change makers with the greater good in mind and brings out the best collectively and making people thrive. So it's time to change the way we do change. And this is why I've created the Change Makers Leadership Academy, Road to Responsive Change, and lead with clarity, confidence, and coherence. Now, this is a purpose-driven program and is delivered first with 6 modules over 8 weeks, a 60-minute one-to-one coaching plus a kickoff strategy call with what you want to create and reinvent, and plus an online community and mobile app to access ongoing group discussions, plus online library of worksheets, templates, reference materials, and even video replays if you miss out on live sessions. So these are the modules integrating the 10 principles. Be future ready for new ways of working, establish and be able to facilitate a compelling shared vision for change. How do you do that? How do you bring people together and make sure they have a shared ownership? And create your reinvention roadmap together, foster support and collaboration, and more importantly, overcome hidden roadblocks and blind spots. We all have them. And also finally embody well-being and satisfaction along the way. I've seen so many programs and so many methods being taught about creating change, but they forget about the last 2 points, about how do we sustain and maintain well-being and a shared sense of satisfaction, and how do we address and even be aware of our hidden roadblocks and blind spots. Plus, you'll have all these additional resources. You've seen the Change Makers Way. I call it the manifesto. You'll have your workbook so you can start applying them, but only not for yourself. When you have this workbook, you can then start sharing that with other people and facilitate that with other people as well. And you'll have a self-assessment tool so you have an awareness of your level of maturity when it comes to transformation and your readiness. Plus, me being a public speaker, I know that speaking in public, speaking off the cuff, and presenting with impact are really critical when you are leading change or creating change, whether it's in your community and whether it's with your organization or your work. You'll also have a comprehensive visual map for, this is a bit more advanced, systemic transformation and generative change. I'll go through with you. These are introduction to even deeper, broader, more profound types of change. When we say generative change, change literally in more than just one generation. And successful meeting facilitation reference guide. We all need this right now because we're facilitating as change leaders a lot of meetings. How do you make sure you finish on time? How do you make sure you actually achieve the agenda and outcomes you want out of a meeting? So who are you going to be by the end of this program? And as I said, this is where I bring the dream to reality, bring it to life. I would love to have change leaders, change makers who has the clarity, confidence, and coherence to create a positive difference with lasting impact. And you're equipped with practical tools to mobilize support, collaboration, and adoption that you need, while having the mindset strategies to foster well-being and satisfaction in the process. So why work with me? I'm sure there are a lot of other people also offering how to change programs. And I will just share, instead of talking from my own perspective, I'm going to share what clients I've worked with say. I walk the change and I care. You know, as one of the partners I work with, he said, I've brought a clear vision and thought leadership in the programs, and as a service excellence major change program, delivered outcomes and added great value in a short space of time. I also maintained effective, honest, and open working relationship. I've brought energy with high standards supported by global practices, assisted my team in continued professional development, so they'd happily work with me again. And this one, one of the guys I worked with in the US, really I care about your growth as well. And this shows in this feedback, my passion raises enthusiasm among clients and peers, makes you think really hard if you know why you're doing what you're doing, and see beyond the limits of what is possible, push you and inspire you to be better. It's really setting people up to evolve and not just meet organizational goals. So the ChangeMakers Leadership Academy, I invite you to apply and be one of the 12 special change makers I am committed to enable, empower, and equip with the principles and practices of the change makers way. So all you have to do really is schedule a call. And why 12? I cap it out, max out. I limit it to 12 because I want to make sure I give personalized attention to everyone who's in the program, plus also to manage the dynamic of the group and have a positive connection within the group. So go to futurepaceglobal.com, changemakers-leadership-program, and all the information about the modules, the resources you're going to get, even the pricing is all in there. Important dates to remember. I closed the application September 7th, well, the early one, and then final close on September 14th. Commence the program with the one-to-one strategic kickoff call September 21st. And then we start the first session on October 3rd, first Saturday of October. So the other thing is I really want you to have a great experience. As an example, here's another feedback that I have a clear vision when I help my clients. My client here has said, I've delivered first-class workshops that are engaging with technical knowledge and capabilities that are outstanding, ideas being presented in language that is easy to understand. And as a natural leader, I develop, empower, and motivate individuals I work with. So one of my clients has said she was pleased to work with me, and I have helped her develop herself, and my guidance has provided her with invaluable experience that's been a turning point in her career. And that's the kind of thing I want to create with people I work with. So here's what I believe. It's time to bring ease, not dis-ease, with principled change making. We see this, at all levels, personally, in our families, relatives, friends, social circles, even professional circles, and even our communities at large. So be the change makers the world need right now. And if you're ready, let's talk. Go to my webpage. It's time to change the way we do change. And if you still believe me that we can actually create change with this, I will leave you with this final image. And if you don't get it, feel free to send me a question in the chat box and I'll answer your question. Now, I hope you get what this means. I'm not going to explain it. It's self-explanatory. This is called nudging. And if we use our creativity, we can actually create change in fun, easy, and fast ways that are not extremely costly and disruptive. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you've taken note of the link. I would still email you anyway if you haven't. And do give me your feedback, whether or not you want to schedule the call, rona@futureplaceglobal.com. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And for those of you who stayed through to the end, thank you.